What would you say has been the key to China's fast growth of the past decades, 2 decades?
Yeah, what's the secret sauce, right? Yeah, I mean, it's obviously unprecedented in history, and the rest of the world has been wondering, is the China model something that's appropriate and would work for them? My own view, it's been a number of things. First, the latent potential of the Chinese economy was always there. It was just a matter of revitalizing it. And that started, let's go back to the WTO. It starts with open markets. Open markets, that's the ability to export and to import and to trade with the rest of the world. So China's accession to the WTO paved an era where we had 20 to 30% growth year on year during over a decade of trade growth. That was just enormous, huge benefits. Secondly, privatization. China, through the reform and opening process, did make a lot of reforms and ushered in a private sector that was very vibrant. If you look at South China and Deng Xiaoping's Nanchun tour and all that, and he got the private sector going again. That was something that was an underutilized force for economic development. So just privatization. Third, foreign investment. Let's be clear. China didn't have the capital back then and relied heavily on foreign investment to come in and provide China with that capital for a lot of things, and the technology as well. So foreign investment made a huge contribution, and still does today in terms of taxation, revenue generation, and employment. That's been a stabilizing force for sure. I also give credit to the Chinese government and its infrastructure development. As I said earlier, the airports, the rail station, the highways, all of that infrastructure really does make sense. I think we've learned for an emerging economy, for developing countries, to make sure that they've got the infrastructure in place so that businesses are willing to invest, to know that what they produce can get out of the country, and that the people they need to hire can be available, etc. And fifth, again, it's a very complicated, it's a secret recipe, right? The fifth thing I would say is stability. Let's not underestimate how important stability is. Europe went through 2 world wars, and we saw how devastating that was to the continent. So just having a peaceful period for 30, 40 years can do amazing things for growth and for development. We've seen that in China as well. So being able to maintain that stability shouldn't be underestimated at all either.
Now, the 5 points, if you have to pick one, which is the most crucial one?
Boy, it'd be a toss-up between, honestly, stability, because that can be an and privatization. Privatization, I think, has been so incredibly important. I think really, really important for governments to set the framework and the rules, and that's why, again, WTO is so important. These ideas of non-discrimination and transparency and level playing field, and the government needs to do that, and it's not easy, and it needs to do it well. But once you've done that, you let the private sector come in, and you let individuals take the risks and get the rewards from being successful with the risk that they take. I think that is by far the biggest, success, and that's what happened in the U.S. That's what happened in Europe. So that's why I take that experience and think that's so valuable for China as well.
But India's also got that, requirement, or you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's a good point. But India has got other challenges. It's got a large population. It's got it's a democratic country, but the democratic process there has been one where you need, as I said, stability as well. And if you have constantly changing rules or regulations or leaders and all that are not consistent in their approaches, it makes it more difficult. So, as I said, the two are very important.
Then, in your over 2 decades in China, which year or what event would you say was a milestone in China's role or change in the trade body or international market?
Well, in terms of the WTO, I mean, China acceded to the WTO in 2001, December 11th, and there was a lot of fanfare at that time. But it didn't just happen overnight. The changes that were to take place were based on a commitment, an accession period of 5 years that China signed up to. And so for me, probably the most important milestone in China's WTO history after joining the WTO was a review of that 5-year accession period. I had just started working at the European Chamber at that time, and one of my first responsibilities was to draft a position and a statement on what we as an organization thought of China's accession process. And perhaps more interesting is the fact that the European Chamber as a body was created, in fact, specifically to monitor China's accession period. Pascal Lamy is a former Director General of the WTO, but before that he was actually the European Union Trade Commissioner, and he was part of the negotiations for China's accession, and as a part of that he would visit China and he would meet with companies. And because this was a bilateral agreement that had to take place between the EU and China, as a part of the overall multilateral agreement, he wanted to meet with European companies. He said, I don't want to meet with just French or German. This is a deal with EU and China. I want to meet with European companies. And for that, he felt there was a need for a European chamber. And so businesses responded to this request that he had. And here we are as the European Chamber, also 20 years later. So there's a very strong link between the two.
Yeah. I didn't know about that story, but when you draft your first review, do you remember what's the breaking point or the starting point you would write or you wrote in your review at that time? Was it difficult?
It was. I mean, like with everything that we do, we go to our members and we ask them for their perspectives and their experiences. But overall, it was a time to celebrate. We congratulated China, and our overall view was that China met and delivered, and sometimes even earlier than expected, on the majority of its obligations. Of course, there were a number of issues that were still outstanding, such as transparency and IPR issues at that time, and are still issues today. But overall, given the starting point of where we were in the relationship, that 5-year period, I think can be described as a success, and I think the trade statistics during that period show that as well.
I understand the EU Chamber of Commerce in China has also come up with many constructive suggestions to refine China's business environment or further open up its market. That's your job, right? So what's your evaluation of the Chinese government's responses to those suggestions?
Our annual position paper, it's got over 800 recommendations from close to 40 different working groups on how to improve the business environment in China. And we meet with our Chinese counterparts throughout the year. We get their input in the drafting process, and we share it with them afterwards. And it's overall, it's a very good and positive relationship. Obviously, not everything we ask for is always implemented right away. But I think it's extremely important for us to have that dialogue, and for China to be aware of the views of of the business community, the foreign business community, in that regard. A few years ago, we did a review of our position paper and what we had seen from when China graduated from its WTO accession period up until 2015, that 10-year period. And we found that approximately half of our recommendations had either been resolved or disappeared or were no longer needed. And so it's good to take stock, to keep track of things, and to move forward accordingly.
And we want to know specifically which sectors do you think that the Chinese side may, do more or speed up its process of settling our, concerns or resolve those issues?
I think the biggest concern right now is a horizontal one, and it's related to security issues. In the last few years, we've seen a number of important documents come out, the national security law, the cyber security law, and these documents, European companies, like all companies, want to be compliant, but the wording in these documents is so wide that there's concerns that many companies here may in the future not be eligible or able to conduct business, either because of information and intelligence that they need to either share with the government or that they need to move and localize here in China, or because it may be deemed as a sector where only the state should be involved. And so that's a real risk. Recent information we've seen suggests that anyone with over a million customers, for example, could be ensnared in this cybersecurity law. And so we need clarity about that, and we need to make sure that China, quite frankly, doesn't turn inward. In the 14th five-year plan, there's a significant focus on self-reliance. And it reminds us a little bit of 40, 50 years ago, where China also wanted to become self-reliant. It felt it couldn't be reliant on the rest of the world. And I think we can understand where some of that is coming from based on certain international tensions that have taken place. But at the same time, we don't want to forget the importance of the 5 things that I talked about earlier, and that is the private sector. If the state takes too big a role, you're going to squeeze out the private sector. Openness, trade. I mean, if you become more self-reliant, it means you're less reliant on external factors, and that's basically trade. Foreign investment in technology is as well. If that technology is not recognized here, companies won't bring it. And so even though we have a lot of confidence in the market here, it may not be the same market that we have in Europe and elsewhere around the world. And as a result, that's going to come with additional costs. And it may mean that it's more costly to do business because you have to localize and you have to use other suppliers, or it may mean that you're excluded from the market altogether. So that's a very real reality that we're facing now. So
right, and you've got an MA in international development. So what's the biggest lesson from China's development over the past 2 decades that you think can be useful for the rest of the world, especially when it comes to the developing world?
Well, I already outlined my 5 reasons as to why I think China's growth was so rapid and works well.
It's universal everywhere.
I think it could be, because not everybody's been as successful as China has. But for me, when I think back across the last 20 years and the amazing changes that have happened, often in the moment you sort of think, well, that's just the way it is. There's nothing we can do about it. It'll be resolved later, or we're working on it. But things happen because people want them to happen and they make them happen. I think the Chinese government does listen very carefully to its publics, listens to business and citizens, and has got very strong control in that regard, and uses it to make a lot of smart choices. I would have liked to have seen the air quality in Beijing cleaned up earlier. I mean, once China put its mind to it, it really fixed it, right? It's amazing what it did.
But in a managed way.
Yeah, it has to be managed, right? I mean, there is a role for government, even though I believe strongly in free markets, there are market failures, and government is extremely important. Again, one of my 5 reasons for the success of China is because of the stability that the Chinese government has provided, and dealing with like the Asian financial crisis in a very strong-handed way to ensure that stability continued. But for a number of I'm not going to pick on any specific issue, but my key point is that change can happen. China is the perfect example of it, and for that to happen, there needs to be people pushing it. And so my organization obviously does it for the interests of European companies and for the business environment overall. But if anything, it gives me, very strong conviction that what we're doing is right. I mean, giving China credit for its reduction in the negative list and the market opening and all that, these are things that we've fought for many, many years. Okay, yes, some of them we would have liked to have happened earlier, some still need to happen, but they happen. And even in certain legislation in China, we've seen wording that's almost identical to what we've have in Europe, and we know that it's there because that's the product and the fruit of the good discussions that we've had about what's best for China and for the Chinese economy, and China's made the decision that this is going to work for us. So again, going back to dialogue and trust and developing what works for the Chinese economy and other countries, we need to have those exchanges and those experiences and learn from each other. And so, we can make change happen. We should continue to do so. Governments need to listen to their publics. Publics need to speak up. And we need to make sure that people continue to, we need to continue to encourage international flows of talent.
Sure. And to you yourself, do you expect your role as the Secretary of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China to be more challenging or less challenging to handle in the years to come?
Our position paper used to be about that big, but it's doubled or tripled in size in the last 20 years.
I see where you're going.
No, you don't. No, you don't. No,
all right.
But our trade relationship has grown 8-fold. Okay. So relatively speaking, you could argue we've got less issues. Honestly, I think that's fair. But our relationship is going to continue to develop. I think it's going to get bigger and I hope better. But in that process, it's going to need people that understand the issues, that are there to deal with the problems when they come up. And so I think there's going to be no shortage of demand for people like myself that are interested in solving and working with China and the EU to ensure our development continues to grow smoothly and far. And I hope I'm still part of it.